But it just makes things tough for Roger Goodell, and it stems from we've talked about it in the past, the lack of credibility that he now has, and whatever the end game is, you're going to have one side complaining. If he's too heavy-handed, the Players Association upset with it, and if he's too soft, well, we saw what happened to Ray Rice. So it's a very difficult position, and I think the league should understand this is what it's going to be moving forward because they've decided, the owners have decided to back a guy, Roger Goodell, who, lacks the credibility to handle these types of matters.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. Are they going to have to get these type of decisions out of his hands? How do they do that? Is that the owners coming together and say, look, we need to come up with a better system of disciplining our players, because right now you're not up to that task?
Well, it comes down to the fact that they can do whatever they want. The 32 owners, they could remove Roger Goodell and kind of cure this problem, but they've backed him to this point, and I see that changing, at least in the short term. The second part of it would be they've already, and I always put it in quotations, they put together this new personal conduct policy, domestic violence policy. It's not really new. Nothing has really changed except they put these standards up, a 6-game suspension for the first offense. But the bottom line is it's the same. Nothing has been collectively bargained. It's the same policy it was in the past, and that means it's strictly under the auspices of the commissioner. Technically, he can do whatever he wants to do, just like it was in previous cases. And that's the problem. Until he has collectively bargained with the Players Association, nothing has really changed. Now, that's not the narrative you'll hear out there, because people constantly report new domestic violence policy, new personal conduct policy, whatever terminology you want to use. The bottom line is it's not been collectively bargained with the players, and they have a big issue with that.
John, let's look at some of the free agent stuff out there. Who are the named NFL free agents that fans should be looking at? Who's going to be the most interesting? Which guys interest you the most?
Well, I think the most interesting, you have to look at Dallas because they have the two big names, and that's Des Bryant and DeMarco Murray. I don't think there's any question they're going to franchise one of them, and that's most likely going to be Des Bryant. And that's if they have to. Obviously, the best-case scenario is you want to work out a longer-term deal because neither side really wants to apply that franchise tag. But if they're backed into a corner and they're forced, that's the guy they're going to put it on, and that means DeMarco Murray will get to free agency after an 1,800-yard rushing season. And the second plot line there is the fact that Adrian Peterson may eventually get to the open market if the Vikings don't want to bring him back, or if he doesn't want to go back to Minnesota. Jerry Jones and Adrian Peterson have been playing footsie for years. He's a Texas native. He's always dreamed of playing for the Cowboys, and that's the kind of splash that Jerry Jones would love. So I think there's a lot of layers possible to DeMarco Murray story. And a little less notable but similar is a situation in Denver because you have Demaryius Thomas, the wide receiver, and Julius Thomas, the tight end. They're both scheduled to be free agents. So you can franchise one of them, but you can't franchise them both. Now, these teams still have time. Free agency doesn't start till March 10th, so they can work out deals, and you wonder if these guys will hit free agency. But there's going to be some big names. It's a more star-studded cast than usual, specifically at receiver and edge pass rusher. I think there's quite a few good pass rushers who might make it to the open market, and one of them's Greg Hardy because the Panthers aren't going to bring him back, and so that mucks up that situation. In that, is he going to be suspended for 6 games? Is it going to be less than that? Because one thing that's certain about whatever you say about him as a person, Greg Hardy is a heck of an edge pass rusher. And very rarely do you get guys like that hitting free agency.
He's a 4-3 guy, right? He wouldn't fit a team like Philadelphia?
No, he's a 4-3 guy, but that's kind of morphing. Those terminologies are kind of becoming passe, and that's why I try to use more of an edge player, edge pass rusher, because the 3-4-4-3, old school mentality is sort of out the window, because multiple fronts is basically what happens with every scheme, and you sort of have these amoeba defenses. And a guy, you saw it with Julius Peppers this year, really, and I thought it would have been a horrible fit, a 4-3 guy his entire career. If you think about him going from Chicago to Green Bay and a 3-4 stand-up player, in his 30s, but he handled it well. He had a great season. And I think if you can rush the passer, you can rush the passer, whether it's going to be in a 3-4 stand-up, whether you put your hand in the ground, you can do it, and you can do it. And Greg Hardy can certainly get it done.
Talk with John McMullen, the NFL editor, sportsnetwork.com. John, you mentioned Dez and DeMarco. Can Dallas sign both? Do they want? I mean, I know the Adrian Peterson stuff there, but ultimately in the end, do they want to get both guys back?
Well, I don't think they do want to get DeMarco Murray back. I really don't. I mean, that's the feeling I got from, about midway last season, and the fact that, it was pretty clear if you saw the number of touches they were giving him. You've seen, historically that if guys touch the ball 350 to 400 times, there's generally a pretty big drop-off after that. We've seen it, with Eddie George and players like that who just take such a pounding. The position itself is just so devastating on the body. So I kind of got the feeling that the Cowboys were going to ride DeMarco Murray till he dropped, with the knowledge that they didn't think they were going to bring him back for 2015. I just get that feeling. And part of it is the fact that I think Jones sees the opening and he might be able to get what he's always wanted, and that's Peterson.
John, let's look at some other intriguing situations, I think. Percy Harvin, Mike Wallace, some wide receivers. It's already a pretty good class. Could there be some additions to an already pretty good wide receiver class?
Yeah, I think there could. I think it's going to be tough for the Jets to, really pay the number they're going to have to pay Percy Harvin, because he's a limited player. He's very explosive. He's, tremendous kick returner. He's tremendous on those jet sweeps, those end arounds. But as a receiver, he's very limited. He doesn't run good routes. He's not really an outside the numbers guy. So I don't know if he can justify that big cap number. He might get there. And you mentioned Mike Williams. The bottom line is he hasn't worked out, and he hasn't had the best attitude in the world. So I think it's they've been meeting, and there's a good chance that the Dolphins will decide they made a mistake and try to move on from that. There's no guarantee, but as you mentioned, if you look at some of the names, and I don't think guys like Dez Bryant and Demaryius Thomas are going to get there when it comes down to it. I think they'll be franchised if need be. But you have, obviously, Randall Cobb. You have a Torrey Smith. The Ravens are already trying to work on that. You have, an underrated guy like Cecil Shorts. Jeremy Maclin with the Eagles. I mean, do you really want to pony up the kind of money he's going to be asking for a guy who's had 2 torn ACLs if you go back to his college days? But there's a lot of proven receivers that could hit the market.
John, give me your thoughts on Deflategate. Anything going to happen there? We haven't heard a word about this since the Super Bowl. Anything down the pipeline?
I don't think it's going to be much of anything. I think you might see a monetary fine. That would be about it. And I think you saw the competing stories where all of a sudden, 10 of 11 footballs were maybe 1 or 2 that were dramatically underinflated, and the rest were just a tick under. And the bottom line, as I said from day one of this whole thing, is the people around the NFL don't consider it that big of a deal. And by people, I mean other teams, other players. They kind of understood this was going on, and they thought it was overblown from the start, and I kind of agree with them.
Everybody, John McMullen with more on the NFL. Of course, as the free agent season about to open up, the franchise tag's got to be doled out pretty soon here, and the draft. We got so much very big names to talk about with this free agent period. Sue could be at the top of that list as well. We'll see where he ends up going. Demaryius Thomas is out there. So When the NFL does something, we will certainly be involved. Got a little bit of a slow period for about 2 weeks here. Then the thing will open back up. John McMullen, NFL editor, sportsnetwork.com with more on the NFL. Thanks, John.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike.
Very interesting stuff he brought up with the Peterson. I know that's been speculated a lot, but he's mentioned it. I don't think Murray goes back to the Cowboys. They really rode him, and it's like the McCoy thing. They think they can just find a guy, plug him in, and don't have to pay him that money. Teams are going to let these guys run it out, use them up 2, 3, 4 years, and then move on from them. It's a sad reality of the NFL.